Hello everyone, hi, it's me, Giffycliff. I'm here with another Social Encounter episode. A sort of weekly stream where I just kind of come on and chat about whatever I kind of find interesting or respond to sort of questions that people have been asking about my work or some of the stuff that I've got coming up. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a Dungeons and Dragons DM and player, and I write sort of supplements for 5th edition, specifically Darker Dungeons, which sort of add a few more sort of gritty, immersive options to your gaming style, and the Monster Maker, which is a sort of monster building supplement that helps you build monsters in a very sort of 4th edition roll rank kind of system. It's a very quick way to build balanced encounters for characters of all levels. And in addition to that, I've also built a sort of a web app to help you create monsters using those rules or sort of the manual sort of style of 5th edition development, and that's available for free on sort of my website. It's a free web app that you can use to sort of develop monsters on your phone and on computer and archive them for sharing or whatever you like to do with your monsters. So in terms of Social Encounter, I usually just sort of respond to a few questions or things that I'm particularly interested in or sort of have noticed in the last week. So what we are going to do is move on to the first question. So what is that? So question 1, what's my writing process and what tools do I use? So I tend to get this one quite a lot. Because my writing, or sort of my layout, tends to be something that I do get a lot of feedback on, which is very complimentary. Thank you, everyone, for saying nice things. So this is sort of like an example of what my supplements look like. You know, you have this front page that's done by me, contents, and this is sort of like the layout that I'm kind of known for. These headers with these icons, tables of a particular sort of style, these little asides here, little examples and stuff. Monster stat blocks, all of this kind of stuff. I tend to get quite a few questions about like what tools I use to write this and how I go about it. So I know that there are a few good options that a lot of people use. I think GM Binder is sort of one of the most common ones. GM Binder, which I think is an offshoot of Home Brewery, if I believe. Home Brewery D&D. There we go. Yeah. So these are sort of markdown tools that you can use to create documents, and just sort of by writing markdown. And some people have created like fantastic works in these like huge supplements and expansions. I think one of my favorite ones is someone has written World of Warcraft 5e conversion, which I love the World of Warcraft kind of world. So I was very happy to see that someone had kind of dipped in and done this. And it's a very impressive bit of work, especially like the layout with all of the images, Like if we look here. Yeah, so this is a very sort of like thorough, impressive document that I would sort of recommend people dip into at some point, especially if you have a big love for the World of Warcraft universe. So I don't use that, and I don't use GM Binder for a number of reasons. But we'll come on to that. So my main tool that I use to write everything in is HTML. I write all of my stuff in HTML scripts. So if we look at an example of, let's take an example of something that I'm working on right now. So we'll open up the project, we'll open up the Dark Dungeons book, and let's look at, here we go. So this is, actually let's open up the preview of that as well. This on the right is the HTML script for this document on the left for the up and coming Light and Shadow expansion for the next update for Darker Dungeons. So all of this stuff I write in HTML because that gives me a huge amount of sort of flexibility in terms of naming elements and arranging stuff on the page, because I can take all of this HTML and using a far too elaborate set of CSS styles and code, transform this script on the right into this layout here on the left. And that gives me sort of very easy ways to just easily change and insert kind of elements on the page, or just sort of test it at various sort of screen sizes and on all this kind of junk. It also gives me a lot of confidence in the consistency of the document. I know that if I want to make one change in a script, or sort of in the style of one page, I know that it is going to be reflected in all of the pages across all of my documents. And I don't have to do much manual work to kind of do that. So let's say, for instance, at the moment, if I wanted to change the way these headers look, if I didn't want them to have a background image, or in fact a foreground image, or I wanted to change what this foreground image was, if I were using a GM Binder document or some other kind of tool, I would have to manually kind of dip in and change all of those. Whereas because I'm using CSS, I can automatically just update that in one place, and it kind of does that all automatically for me, which is a huge, like when you're dealing with, where are we at now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 possible documents. And Darker Dungeons certainly is the largest, with, like that's at least 25 separate chapters, right? I need something that is going to cut down on my runtime for releasing these kind of things. I can't be spending time worrying about the layout of one page when I've got like 25 other documents, like at least like 200 pages of supplement that I need to kind of finesse and adjust. So this is a huge time saver for me. Or having said that, it's a huge time saver now, but I obviously had to put in a lot of time to kind of get it up to the format that it is now, which was not insignificant. So after, so I have this HTML that I write everything in, and then that's linked, or sort of that references these sort of CSS styles. There is another layer on top of that, and that is a set of JavaScript functions that automate a huge chunk of work here as well. Some of it is very obvious, things like page numbering and footer text. A lot of this stuff gets automated by this little set of functions in a sort of wrapper that I call Tome. And this does a lot of sort of useful background stuff for me in terms of automation. You know, like I say, sets a bunch of basic details, page numbering, all of this kind of junk. What it also does is, and some of you aren't going to care in the slightest about this, but I tend to do. It also makes sure that everything is aligned very carefully. So I care very much about alignment and balance, especially when you're dealing with content that goes across two columns. So I have like JavaScript that searches through the document and makes sure that all the tables are certain heights, so that all of the individual headers align and all of the lines match up. Because I'm very particular about that kind of stuff, especially when to an almost obsessive level. Because whenever I like to release a document, let's say, well, like Darker Dungeons, some of you who read this or have read this or look at this might notice that every single page, unless I've made a mistake somewhere, is full to a particular, it's just full of content every time, because I make sure that everything is aligned correctly and that the content on each column is full, so I don't have any empty space on any of the pages. Because if I do, I can just kind of throw in an example and bloat out that, not bloat it out, but, you know, add in some flavorful padding to just kind of space that column out. And then my JavaScript functions just kind of run through and make sure everything is at the right height to get the right alignment. What else does Tome do? Tome also, which is a massive time saver for me, especially, just builds these monster blocks for me. So these are generally built using my Monster Maker code. And if we look at here, for example, let's take the Court of Bones documents. So the Court of Bones is a sort of small adventure that I wrote in the Monster Maker, and that references some monster blocks. So we have here sort of on the left, we have like this skeleton soldier and this skeleton archer, and this is all formatted in a particular way. Now, if we open up the code for that, the Court of Bones here, skeleton archer. Here you go. So this little bit of code here gets automated by my JavaScript wrapper and turned into this thing on the left. So you can see that I don't have to worry about calculating things like the hit points or the damage or any of that junk. It kind of does all that automatically for me based on these little input things like the level and the roll. It will calculate all that automatically, so that if I want to change this, for instance, as I did many times sort of while I was writing this, like just changing the level, it will just calculate all the numbers automatically for me based on a lot of these sort of shortcodes. This is also something, so these shortcodes, while I was coding this in a sort of nice little idea. That ended up feeding back into the application. So you can see here these sort of shortcodes that are now free to use in the web app kind of came from me needing this sort of flexibility in the stat blocks that I was generating for the Monster Maker document. And that, again, has been a huge time saver now. And that allows me to just kind of drop in monster blocks without too much thought. So after the JavaScript, so the JavaScript sort of does all its thing, and that's great, that's brilliant, and that gives me sort of like these nice little individual pages that are now all aligned and all. Oh, actually, sort of this is also something that it does, which can be a huge saving for me. Which chapter is this? Making a journey. Here we go. So it would, like, something that really infuriates me is when I need to do a big list of stuff, like here in the Making a Journey section, which has all these sort of encounter seeds, right? Little sporadic ideas that you can just randomly roll, and that gives you like a little random thing to happen during your journey. But a lot of times I might just want to kind of change one or move one around or insert something at a later time, or just kind of like take this out and add in 2 more or whatever. And I don't want to have to spend all my time calculating the numbers for each individual row and sort of updating those in the future. You know, it's a huge waste of time. So Tome also allows me to just kind of write a list of stuff, specify a starting number, and then it will format it automatically. You know, it turns this list here into this table here, which, you know, when you're doing tables for content like this, again, it's a huge time saver, and that was a really useful sort of bit of kit for me to kind of put together. So once I have my HTML document styled with CSS and prepared or sort of formatted with JavaScript, that's great for these sort of individual chapters. But before I'm about to release something, I need to compile it all into one big document. You know, this Darker Dungeons or Monster Maker or whatever this individual kind of final product is going to be. And that is done using these Python scripts. So these allow me to take or sort of specify individual chapters and group them up into sections. So you can see here, for instance, so part 1 here on the right, character creation, feature changes, rookie characters, yada, yada, yada. And then when I run this script, it will grab everything, bundle it all together, create these interstitial kind of section pages, and generate automatically the contents page, the front cover, the back cover, and any kind of spacing pages that it needs. So that's kind of like the last piece of the puzzle. And I didn't have this for a very long time. It was only once Darker Dungeons started reaching, like, I think 60 pages, 80 pages actually might have been the breaking limit. And I realized I had to find a way to kind of break stuff up into separate chapters rather than just have this kind of 1, 2, or 3 kind of monolithic document, because it wasn't, it was too difficult for me to visualize the document in one go, right? I'd like to be able to cut and paste stuff and sort of move sections around when they're sort of into places that are more appropriate for that content, right? Especially when I'm sort of writing more content, and then it's like, oh, hang on, now I can kind of bundle these 3 chapters together, and they kind of go here. So those tend to be the tools that I use that I've sort of written now for my process, and they've been very useful. I'm always still kind of iterating on them as sort of a new project comes up or whatever. And it would be, I think it would be nice at some point to be able to, I don't know, almost kind of like release these. I don't know how useful they would be generally, right? Because at the moment they're very hard coded to kind of my style and my way of writing stuff. So I don't really know how useful they would be compared to something like GM Binder, because this is very sort of code heavy. But it is something that I am considering all the time in the back of my head. Perhaps one day, sort of once I've written enough stuff for 5e, I will set it as like a Patreon goal and then kind of release it as sort of open source content. But yeah, so those are the tools that I write. So in terms of the actual process of writing stuff, this is a lot more formal, I guess. So if we switch back to light and shadow, for instance, what I generally do is I have an idea for something. Let's bring up Notepad. How do I write? Very slowly, for one. So, one, get an idea, something really, really annoys me. So, taking light and shadow, for example, what is really annoying to me, tracking distance is pointless and no one does it. You know, Wizards of the Coast have written rules that only really work if you're using a virtual tabletop, which is astounding to me. I've never met anyone in real life who tracks light, and it baffles me that there isn't a proper alternative rule set for that kind of stuff. So I'm going to have to step in and try and fix that. So, usually I'll get an idea. I'll flesh out a couple of just sort of basic sections. So I know that, for instance, sort of with light and shadow, I knew that I would need like a very core thing of like describing how, like, what light levels are, and then sort of like what can I do to modify that stuff. So that's like the core stuff that I would need in order to describe this. And then after that, I'll generally struggle for a bit because it's very difficult to kind of get those first few lines right. My style for writing has kind of evolved a bit as I've done more and more of it. So I like to lead in with this sort of intro paragraph almost on the left, almost consistently for sort of every chapter, that gives you a very thematic kind of layout for the problem, and like just a quick boom. Okay, now this is what this chapter is gonna be bringing to you. And then I usually like to do a sort of intro. What is the thing and how to use the thing, so that like just from this very first page you get a rough sense of kind of what is it trying to fix and how is it going to be fixing it. You know, we don't need all of the detail on this one page, we just need a very kind of high level, basic, here's the steps that we're going to be dipping into in more detail in like the following sort of 4 or 5 pages. So here on the left, for instance, you know, that's kind of what we got here. It's like, okay, this is how you're going to be using this module if you apply it into your game. And then I sort of start dipping into the heavy kind of mechanics side of it. And this is kind of where it gets very complicated for me as a writer, because I'm not very good at being brief. So light levels were very difficult, and they're still difficult, and we're not particularly happy with them yet, because of a couple of issues. But basically, I need a page that kind of tells you, the reader, how to describe lighting conditions in a very brief way that isn't going to bore the fuck out of you or your players, right? So this page itself, I think, has gone through about sort of 5 different revisions, where I'm constantly kind of like cutting chunks out and shifting bits around, or sort of adding an example and then removing it because I don't have enough room, because actually I needed this kind of table at the bottom. So it kind of goes through sort of cycles like that. And then after that, it's like, okay, well now, like once light levels, you know, mostly done, what can I do to modify that stuff? Okay, cool. You know, now the fun stuff for players. And again, so this is the section that I'm currently struggling with at the moment, because again, you know, it's like I know what I kind of want to block out, and you can kind of see it here. So I know what I need: a section on basic lighting equipment, which will kind of explore the stuff that players can buy and carry into dungeons or whatever. And then following on from that, I always get kind of drawn into, oh wait, hang on, so what about spells and effects? So I need a little section on that to talk about, and that's what this is going to be. Oh, wait a minute, what if I've got like a fire elemental, right? Or just sort of lava in the room, or sort of a sun god's kind of temple, you know, like the sort of got blinding mirrors everywhere. Oh, well, I need a little thing on environmental light and creatures, right? And then I kind of get, it's very easy to get drawn into that. I've had that problem with sort of consumables at the moment. So, yeah. And all the distractions. This is like this is the big time sink, really. Because I get distracted by stuff very easily. I think, where are we? Sort of around... Yeah, here we go. Someone the other day was talking, in the random encounter, was talking about a sort of Arctic adventure kind of thing, and now that's got me spiraling and sort of thinking about a big Arctic setting with sort of crystal Tiberium, and that I think I'm going to start calling Frostfall. Because I get distracted by cool shit all the time. And that's part of the reason why it takes me a very long time to kind of write the stuff that I do. 1, because I get distracted, and 2, I keep refining stuff and perfecting it, right? This name's band Tiberium, sweet. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's such a good material. Like, you can build so much story with just Tiberium as a building block, right? You know, it's like, it's a really cool resource, but at the same time, it's crippling to you, and it corrupts you, and it turns you into monsters, right? I mean, that's like a perfect kind of D&D like material. And I sort of like, as we were, I think when did that come in? It came in around here. Yeah, I think, yeah, we were like, oh, okay, cool. So we got like crystals, and that can be, maybe there are like different types of them, and they have dangerous properties because they're a trap, right? It's going to be a kind of crystalline trap. And then where did that come in? Yeah, so here we go. And then I was trying to think about, oh, cool, so where do these crystals come from? Maybe they're like pulled in from like the far realm, where it's like a mage's experiment gone wrong. Or did they fall from space, right? And then I realized I was just copying Tiberium because it's a great material. So I'm just going to nick Tiberium, basically, and do fantasy shit with it. And then I'll probably try and fit Kane in, because he's the bomb. But anyway, so that is, yeah, pretty much how I write. I get distracted by a lot of stuff. I have an idea for stuff, then I get distracted by a lot of stuff. Then I sit down to kind of write stuff in tools that I have spent a lot of time getting distracted by and writing. Cool. So I think that's probably answered that question. We'll move on, shall we? To question 2. What were the best and worst bits of D&D 4th edition? Divinity Original Sin uses a toxic metal. Oh yeah, I've seen that. So I've only played the first. I've got the second Divinity Original Sin. I haven't like gotten very far into it, but it's Telenium or something like that. Divinity Metal. Oh, never mind. Works quite well as you have a dangerous material rather than just strong and rare, like mithril or adamantine. Yeah, no, I totally I fully agree. Like, anytime I try and add a resource into my campaigns, I always try and think of, 1, a reason why you would want to use it, and 2, a reason why you definitely wouldn't want to use it. So I mean, that's kind of where I realized I was just kind of stealing Tiberium for these crystals, because it was like, oh, cool, okay, crystals, maybe they're like really cool for arcane power, and they attract stuff. Mute? Am I on mute? I'm going to assume I'm not on mute. Yeah, okay, probably okay. Where was I? Crystals. That was it. Yeah, so it was like, how can they be used, and sort of what's the benefit to using them? Oh, cool, they're good for like magic, and so you're going to have like factions who really kind of want you to keep using the crystals because you're going to be really powerful casters, and then you have the faction who really, really want to keep using them because, hey, all this power, maybe we can become an elder god kind of thing. And then sort of spiraling on from that, you have like, oh, yeah, why don't I want to use it? Because it corrupts you and turns you into a disgusting kind of monster. Or a gross kind of abomination. So yeah. Someone sent me a there was a very good crafting resource I read recently by one of my kind patrons, Strider, and that features that sort of divinity material, and it has some very good kind of thematic riders off it, which I was very happy to see. Let me just double check. I'm not on mute, right? You can still hear me? Phew. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Sorry, right. So where were we? Okay, so what were the best and worst bits of D&D 4th edition? Now this is something I see all the time, and it hurts me a lot because 4th edition was kind of my introduction really into D&D, or like my proper introduction. Like I'd played it before with I owned the 3.5 books, but I never really kind of got around to getting a group together. So the closest I got was playing Baldur's Gate, right, on the PC, and Baldur's Gate 2, and I like loved them, but that was sort of the closest I got. So 2008 was it? I'd sort of moved to London. 4th edition had just come out, and it was like, okay, perfect. Now, now's the time. I'll join the sort of local meetup group, and I'll start playing. And it was so much fun. It was so good. Seems to be hotkey to mute a tab in the browser. Yeah, I have that problem with hotkeys all the time. It's awful. But yeah, so 4E. Why does everyone hate it? And that is the unfortunate, sad thing about 4th edition. Like, no one really seems to love it, which is very sad because why is it great? 4th edition did so many things right, in so many cool little ways. So what did it do right? Class roles. Fantastic for a party-based game. I really felt like a support character when I was playing the cleric. I really felt like a defender when I was the fighter, and I was locking people down in combat with opportunity attacks. Stopping them from moving, stopping them from getting around. Using shield to kind of block my allies from enemy attacks. I really felt like a controller when I was a wizard and moving monsters around and pushing them into fire crafted by our sort of warlock, or into like blade storm, these sort of cool area attacks. Yeah, I really felt like a striker when I was just blowing the crap out of everyone with my warlock. Must have been Eldritch Blast then, still. Like, class roles, so good in party play. In the first campaign that I played, our dungeon master, Edward, was brutal. Like, it was a Shadowfell kind of based game, and we were alone in the Shadowfell, stuck in the Upside Down, trying to find a way home, being chased by this necrotic dragon, called Despair, and it was grim, and we genuinely had to fight for our lives. Every battle was a death's door. And the class roles, like, I mean, that was hands down the best time I've ever had playing a cleric, because I could kill things and heal things at the same time, right? You know, class roles. Ooh. Being a cleric was not boring heals. I could heal people and kill undead at the same time. It was so good. Paper mooks, baddies, a lot of the at-will powers make great enchantments for magic items. Oh, yeah, definitely. Gilmazino? Let's pretend I said that name correctly. Yeah, I nick stuff from 4th edition all the time, as we can definitely tell with the Monster Maker, right? Which is just monster rolls and class rolls, just rips off 100%. And why was like combat in and the main thing like 4th edition had really was it had a fantastic combat engine. Like, it was so good and so well regimented, right? What was so great? At wills, encounters, dailies, right? You know, every class had something cool they could do all the time. They could do sometimes, and they could do like rarely, right? You know, your big thing, right? And what did that mean? It meant that marshals were not shit boring to play. Like playing the fighter in 4th edition was some of the most fun I've had in a D&D game, because you were so important, right? You know, you can't rely on your wizard to do everything in 4th edition like you can in most other D&D editions, because of this elegant power rationing, right? And so every power also had like clear rules about what it can do. There was no real debate on what a power can do, because it usually just told you hit twice, hit this defense, do this damage. If you hit, then do this. Like the way it wrote powers was beautiful. Like, if we compare it to 5e SRD, you know, if you compare it to even just like this is exhausting to read, right? I don't want to read a power like this. I want to be able to look at something and in 2 seconds know what does it do, what happens when I miss, what happens when I hit, right? This is just like word vomit, right? And it's not. I mean, it's great if you're trying to go for flavor and the 3rd edition thing that really they're trying to get back with 5th edition. Then that's great, but it's not good design for a thing to play, in my opinion. 4E, probably a really sweet game engine for an actual computer game. The new Baldur's Gate is probably 5th edition. Yeah, I totally agree. Like 4th edition, why were there no 4E games? The engine like the combat engine in it was so good, and you know, from everything I've read about the history of 4th edition, was so geared towards this eventual virtual tabletop thing that they were trying to kind of build towards before they scrapped all that for a myriad of reasons. So it had these clear powers supporting these clear class roles, written in a clear way with mostly clear mechanics on how combat works, which is great if you're running a very combat heavy game. If you're not, we'll come on to that. What else did 4E do that was great? Skill challenges. Now, this is another thing that I really loved and brought across into a lot of the ways that I kind of run 5th edition as well. So skill challenges were a very sort of super neat way to break down a problem in a sort of narrative way. So for those of you who don't know, a skill challenge is basically, here is a problem. Let's say, you know, you are trying to escape this, you're trying to cross this ravine before this undead army can kind of find you, can like reach you, right? So you want to climb this gap somehow before this horde can get to you. So in a skill challenge, you would basically say, okay, story-wise, we need 4 successes before 2 failures, right? And that will tell us how the story goes. And then you would just kind of go around and each character would kind of try and contribute to the story in some way and roll a skill that seems appropriate for what they're trying to do. And based on whether that's like a success or a failure, you know, that kind of indicates how the skill challenge is going. And you just keep going around the table until you have either succeeded at the challenge and the story moves on, or you failed and something really bad happens. And this was a very, very elegant way of doing little group scenes, I found. And I do these, like I say, I still do these all the time in my 5th edition games. There was a demo for the original table-sized. I think the app died trying to chew off too much at once and never got completed. That sounds likely. I think 4th edition's biggest problem is it came out just a generation too soon. You know, if 4th edition came out now or had come out at the time of 5th edition, I think it would be in a much, much better place. So it would be a lot more well liked because it would have the streaming presence, and streaming is kind of what's getting 5th edition going. You know, 5e is a good game. But its main virtue at the moment is that it's just happened to land at the right time for streaming to really sell it and sort of get everyone involved in sort of all the streams. So I think 4E is very much a victim of its time, and some of its design issues that we will unfortunately come on to. But what else was 4E great at? Let's switch back to the combat engine for a second, because what else did it have? It had unified defenses, or unified rules for defenses. AC, reflex, fortitude, and will. So good from a design perspective. Attacker always rolls attack. Attack is always versus a defense. And this was so simple. And it blew my mind that 5e stepped away from it. the 4 defenses, including AC, gave players some flexibility in prioritizing their stats, because each one was based off of 2 of your attributes, right? I think reflex was int or dex. Fort was strength and con, and will was wisdom, charisma, I think. And whichever of those sort of 2 attributes was the highest, that would determine what your defense was for that kind of type. So that would allow you some sort of variant in how you wanted to build your character, but you could still find ways to get high defenses in your sort of attributes, which were really good. And the rolling was brilliant. None of this 5th edition. Some things are attacks, some things are saving throws, like thing that you have to keep talking about every time you use the attack. If you're making an attack, you are the person who rolls a dice, and it's versus a defense. It's always the same. It's straightforward. It's elegant. 4E had that in a lot of ways, like so many ways. Now, it did have a few problems though. So yeah, let's just summarize. So the high. Oh, yeah, of course, I'm forgetting one of the sort of the main things. Monster encounter building was so easy for DMs. Building a combat encounter in 4th edition, the easiest thing in the world. Take a template, set the defenses to the kind of expected level, like values for those levels. Add in a roll. Make sure you've got enough monsters to meet the number of players. Minions, elites, solos. So much easy variety. It was a DM's dream, because you would always have stats available to create a balanced encounter for your players. You didn't have to worry about CR or coming up with these weird arbitrary calculations on like what contributes to CR and what doesn't, and how many things of this CR equal things of this CR and equal a player level. Like none of this weird abstraction. Monster level versus character level, done. And this for me as a DM who really enjoys combat and really enjoys set pieces, I would say, was perfect. Like, I love to run big boss battles, and 4th edition just gave me the tools straight out of the gate in order to do that. And that was great. But what wasn't so great? Or having said that, actually, if there's anything you particularly remember about 4th edition that I haven't quite covered here, or anything that you really enjoyed that 4th edition kind of brought to the table, do let me know in chat. The original surface was also blue sky tech. Actually, yeah, let's have a look at this.
The character registration portion.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing this.
Down their control object, which is where the user interface for each player will appear, as well as their miniature,
Yeah,
and
this
affected
was
their character. The system
crazy.
can be
Like, I mean,
interacted
in
with
fairness,
using
I
another
knew
control
when I
object
was
that
watching
you
this,
can move
there's
around
no
to
way
move the map around,
it would
as
ever
well as
kind of
turn clockwise or counterclockwise to zoom.
it would ever really work. Or certainly, I mean, can you think of the amount of time it would take you as a DM to put all this together? Incredible. But it did look really damn cool. And I think it's I mean, you're right. It's kind of getting there now with. I think Roll20 can do a real amount of stuff, but this kind of stuff actually, like with the UI, that was really cool. This was the thing that I loved seeing the most. I love that kind of anything that's like cool little weird little UI stuff like that. You know, anything that's, it just reminds me very much of like anime computer interfaces. Like I love that kind of stuff. I remember that dice looks awful. It looks really unfun to roll. But yeah. Where is it again? Yeah, let's have a look. Yeah, there it is. That's the cool interface. Even as a former Unix admin, it would be crazy hard to assemble, and stuff like Roll20 didn't even... Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've like... I cannot fathom how difficult it would be to kind of actually run something in this. I struggle with Roll20 anyway. Like, I'm not that kind of DM, unfortunately. Like, I need stuff in front of me. And it's difficult enough to just kind of get players together and prep stuff based on that without then having to go through the middle kind of ground of like now trying to get all my ideas and funnel them somehow into this like interface. But it would be really cool. Oh, just look at it. Yeah, there it is. Sorry, I shouldn't be more excited by the interface than I am by the D&D. That's ridiculous. Arken Forge. Ooh, what's Arken Forge? I haven't heard of that one. Is this like another sort of virtual tabletop kind of thing? Masters Toolkit. Cross over there. Running it would probably be simple. The 6 months of prep for a 1 hour session, though. Yeah, exactly. I think the big problem for me is the big problem I would have for that, or rather, I think it would probably be great for something like Adventurers League stuff, right? Where you're expecting players to be on the path and they'll kind of follow that path to the adventure's end, right? It doesn't give you too much room to go off and do your own thing. I could definitely see a market or a vehicle for it there. I think for normal games, though, where your players are 100% guaranteed to just want to go off and not follow the plot, that's kind of that's where it gets a lot tricky, right? To just, oh no, we can't do that because I don't have the models for it, and I've built all this stuff. So can we just pretend that you're going to follow the plot? So what is this? No, not about us. Just tell me what you are. Offline software. Okay, that's good. To manage. Oh, okay. It's a sort of management thing. Soundscape and so. Ooh, okay, nice. Yeah, this does sound. Ooh. Ooh, okay. I do like that. I do like isometric maps. Like, that is nice. I saw a really nice set of isometric maps actually from someone on a Kickstarter a while ago. I was really gutted actually that I'd kind of missed that and didn't get a chance to back it. Yeah, this does look nice. I might have to dip into this. Normally, I'm not really one for virtual tabletops. I'm very lucky to kind of have people to play with in sort of meet space, but that might not always be the case. I might just have to learn to move with the times. Okay, sorry, wait. So we were talking now about why 4th edition may possibly have sucked. And there were a few reasons for that, I want to say. So what wasn't great? Well, let's maybe go back to the brilliant or not so brilliant combat engine. Because class powers, so many of them, which leads to decision, yeah, there we go, paralysis, which leads to very, 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 very long combat times. This was the real struggle I had with 4th edition, especially as your levels increase, and especially once you start dipping into like Paragon and Epic tiers. Which actually, let's add this back here. What was good about 4th edition? Tiers. What was it? Heroic, Paragon, Epic. Gave you something to kind of, or gave your character, I should say, a plot point to kind of strive towards. So there was a sort of very, it was a very fun little way of expanding your character without like being purely about your class. Like I had a Valiant, Valiant was my prime 4th edition cleric at the time. And he became, over time, like he started off as a cleric of Kelemvor, and then he became a Doom Guide, right? The sort of like one of the prime fighters of Kelemvor's divine force. And then as he hit Epic, he became chosen. He became a sort of demigod, or had this sort of spark of demigodhood. And then it became like, well, this is interesting. Is he going to become... Well, he's now a demigod, so is he kind of going in his own direction? And how is that going to pit him up against Kelemvor, who he's kind of served for all of this campaign? It's like very interesting, fun little character moments that really came out of that system that I found. We had someone who became like a lich. That was an epic character path that they kind of wanted to pursue, and then the story became about them trying to find a way to become a lich without having to kind of do a big bad murdery thing. And this was a really fun, natural way to kind of feed in character story into the game. And this was great. But once you hit those tiers, characters had so many options, so many things they could do, so many powers. You had your moves, you had your minors, you had your major, just standards. And you had reactions and interrupts. And you had so many of those that, it would not be uncommon to spend... I played in a 5 to 6 player game. A round could take 20 to 30 minutes at its worst. And that was crippling. Class powers also meant so difficult to homebrew classes and subclasses. Because, one of my definitely favourite things about 5th edition is that if you want to write a class or a subclass, it's really fucking easy. Especially subclasses, like you can see people rattling those off, like hundreds a day. because you just have to kind of think about, okay, well, there's like 4 or 5 levels where my subclass gains a feature, so I just need to think about what those are going to be in an interesting kind of way. Brilliant. If you wanted to write a class in 4th edition, you've got to write all the powers, boy, and you're not going to want to do that because there's a lot of them and it's exhausting. So no one really developed new classes or powers for 4th edition. You were stuck using the powers in the books. And oh, there were so many power books. It was incredible. If we look actually at 4E books, look at all of this. We'll ignore the campaign ones. We'll ignore the essential stuff for now. These were the core ones. They split races across 3 handbooks. Races and classes. And then on top of that, all of these. And some of these contain really cool powers that if you didn't buy the book, or you didn't buy the adventuring... what was their tool set that they used for this? Adventurer's Vault, something like that. You were screwed. You know, you had to use the substandard powers and feats that were in the default books. I mean, this is a lot of stuff. A lot of people begrudge 5th edition for its sort of slow content release cycle, but I'm a huge fan of it because you don't need all this stuff really. You don't need a company to give you power creep and eventually make your game invalid, because that's what happened. There were so many books, and it was just exhausting, like trying to keep up. In fact, I didn't. I think I just stuck with the core books and borrowed occasionally a few books off of other friends and DMs who had the set as and when I kind of needed them. But it was just exhausting to keep up. Exhausting to keep up. Power creep. Real bad. And that was, it's very tough. Oh, the combat engine as well. Yeah, actually. So, problem with class powers as well. Very easy to build a, I'm just going to say a shit character. Before you kind of assumed that you were going to build a good character, and if you didn't, you were going to have a very difficult time. So make sure that your race kind of supports your class, because if you don't, you're being substandard and you're kind of letting the team down, and that's going to screw up the monster math that kind of assumes that you're all going to be fairly optimized characters with appropriate magic items kicking in at certain tiers. Which meant that magic items were necessary and bullshit and boring. So another thing I do have to kind of congratulate 5th edition for is its magic items are now flavorful, right? They're rare enough that when they do turn up, they're kind of cool. Especially like some of the weird, like odd powers that they have. 4th edition ones were purely about like optimizing your character. You could occasionally get really cool ones, but it was basically all about like getting your +1s to your defenses and finding the right thing that would synergize with the powers that you have in order to let you be even better in combat, because that's really all that the game focused on. Again, it didn't really give you any tools outside of skill challenges to do non-combat stuff. And when all of the book is talking about class powers to help you kill things, that ends up being what the game focuses on, because those are the only tools your characters have to interact with the world. Which is kind of, again, why it blows my mind that there weren't any 4th edition video games, because it was a very combat heavy game. Items to support class, but not fun. Oh, and also, yeah, so items also had powers that triggered in certain ways that, again, the more items you have, the more powers you have, the more decision paralysis you have, the longer the game takes. And it was just exhausting, like, at the end. And when I moved away from running 4th edition, I didn't mind too much. I still play in a 4th edition game now at the moment, which has been very fun, but it is kind of coming up to that point where I'm starting to feel the grind a little bit per round, and I'm starting to lose that fun part of it. Which means, yeah, it was all about combat, really. Which is a bit of a shame. And I struggled for a long time to kind of accept the reality of that, almost. Because I do tend to believe that a game is really about kind of what you, as the GM, make it about. Or you and your players, right? But when everything in the book is about ways to kill things better, that ends up being what your game becomes. The rules in 4th edition had a awful economy system that didn't make sense. It had awful world building. Because caused partly by the tier system. Sort of like by the time you hit Paragon level, which was like 11 to 20, it kind of assumes, okay, well now you're going to be off sort of exploring planes and all of these kind of weird spaces in the world, which then suddenly means that all of this stuff you've been building up in the first bit of the game, you're not going to be dealing with that anymore or meeting those characters anymore, because you're going to be off in the Feywild or the Shadowfell, or the Elemental Chaos, or sort of, places that are fun, but at the same time you just end up scrapping the first third of your campaign. And then by the time you hit Epic tier, when you're kind of dealing with gods and like crazy stuff, like insanely powerful characters, that's it. Everything, 2/3 of your world building, that's just kind of gone and redundant now. So you need to start almost from scratch every single time players hit a new tier, and that is kind of exhausting. And it was a real shame, because I do have a lot of fondness for 4th edition, and it is something I keep meaning to kind of go back and play. I really do want to play a sort of 1st to 5th level, I think, 4th edition campaign. I have a few friends who got into 5th edition and sort of never played 4th, and that would be, I think, a really fun way, just limiting it to like the core sort of the first player's handbook, and just letting them kind of have fun with that role system. I think that would be nice, just to remind me how good it was. Oh, yeah, there we go. Bloodied condition. Really useful, flavorful, combat thing. So bloodied condition, for those of you who don't use it in your 5th edition games, when a character or a monster hits half their hit points, they're considered bloodied. And if they're bloodied, sometimes that means like powers change, or they gain new abilities, or a thing happens. You know, like when my dragon is bloodied, it recharges its breath attack and uses it immediately because it's kind of enraged, right? So it was a very fun way of just kind of connecting little scenes during the combat to states in your monsters, rather than it just having no discernible state. And that is something that I've again 100% sort of brought into my 5th edition games. I always like make a point to describe a monster as being bloodied to players. It helps them feel that there's a sense of progression during the fight. Yeah, so I think those are probably my biggest gripes with it. I want to say, I mean, there was no way you could do theatre of the mind. In fairness, I never really do theatre of the mind with D&D. Like, I have tile sets and I have miniatures. I have way too many miniatures. Thank you, Reaper Bones Kickstarters. So and I love having like things on the table to kind of give, you know, players and me something to kind of focus on while the game is going on. So I never really do theatre of the mind myself, unless it's outside of skill challenges or whatever. But I know that a lot of people do, and there was no way you could do it with 4th edition. 4th was so tied to the concepts of a grid. You know, everything was squares, not feet. So it did describe everything in this very gamey language, which is great when you're running a game, but D&D is also simultaneously a sort of storytelling system. So it was this very odd merging of game language into world language that didn't really work for a lot of people. And I think that was another reason why it was so difficult for people to just kind of hook into it. It didn't really support how they had played games before 4th edition. Yeah, I think that's probably my core gripes with 4th. Well, my core gripes and my core loves of it. Oh, wait, no, there also one. Eladrin are really fucking cool. So be an Eladrin. Yeah, Eladrin could Misty Step, I think it was in 4th edition. I mean, it's still in 5th, right? But they were the coolest, and I was really glad that 4th brought them in. Oh, wait, also, the Spell Plague. Holy shit. How do you spell plague? Spell Plague, brilliant way of starting off your new system by blowing up a huge chunk of Forgotten Realms, because hot take here, Forgotten Realms is bullshit and boring and not fun to have adventures in because everything's kind of being explored and yeah. So the Spell Plague happened and suddenly it was all exciting again because things have moved around a lot and you know, a bunch of the gods have died, which is brilliant. You know, I don't have to worry about this weird hierarchy of gods, and there are so many of them in earlier sort of in earlier D&D. I was so glad they cut that pantheon down. And the Spellplague was perfect. It gave you so many easy character hooks and little kind of like magic scars, and it was so much fun to just kind of world build in. And I was a huge fan of that. So much fun. Correction, blowing up stuff is so much fun. So, I loved the stuff they did with the Spellplague. Not least because of the story behind it, right? Like Zaztam is doing stuff around here, and he's a huge fun for me. And Shah is doing stuff, and it was like big and epic and like great stuff here. Seric as well, like so much cool stuff. And then I think in 5th, I don't even read the lore anymore for 5th. Like they do the Sundering, is that right? And they just kind of undo it all, and it's like, like accept your heritage, right? But yeah. If there's anything you particularly enjoyed about 4th edition, or anything you particularly hated, I think there's going to be a lot of that. Do let me know in chat, and I will either gush or tell you why you're wrong, or maybe agree with you. Perfect. So yeah, I think that's enough 4th edition talk for now. Unless chat comes up with something. So in the meantime, question 3: why should I use random character generation? Now this is also something that I see a lot. Why should I use random character generation? And I think we can just sum it up really in like 3 words, because it's cool. There you go. We just kind of answered that question. What was it? TLDR, right? There we go. So, I see this come up a lot, especially in conjunction with Darker Dungeons, right? So Darker Dungeons, I added rules to support randomly generating your character in 5th edition. So, you randomly roll for your race and all of this stuff, background and blah, 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 blah. And the reason I did this is, 1, because it's kind of fun, discovering stuff, and 2, to break players out of comfort zones. And this is sort of like the main points. So, 1, why should you do it? Players always stick to their comfort zones. So, and I'm definitely guilty of this myself. Because hyper-optimized idiot savants are boring. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, it kind of depends very much on your group and how many sort of min-maxers you kind of have playing with, or if you indeed are a min-maxer, it can be hard to kind of get away from that. So players always, almost always, stick to type. They have a particular role in the group. I'm home. Hi, Strider. How you doing? You just missed us talking about 4th edition and why it's great and why it's not great, and we're now just talking about why you should use random character generation. and because it's great is really the answer. So players always stick to type, you know, whether it's like their role in the their social role in the group, which has this sort of, you know, weird social hierarchy, and then that kind of follows through into how they play in Dungeons and Dragons. So I almost always, I'm always a support role, like almost 100% of the time, because I'm a world builder, and I kind of want to, even subconsciously, I'm trying to help my my DM keep the story going, right? Even sort of as a player, I kind of want to keep things moving. And if I'm a support character, especially a healer, because healers hold all the power in the group. There were so many times, especially in my 4th edition games, where I was Valiant, the cleric. I could get the party to not do what I consider to be a stupid action just by saying, if you do that, I'm not healing you. I just won't heal you. You might die. Yeah, sure. I'm not going to heal you though. So let's move on. Which was very useful sometimes. You know, even though I'm, you know, not officially like the leader of the group, the healer holds a huge swing of power, and then I would almost always kind of gravitate towards being the leader because I try and keep things going and keep the party together, and that's my my comfort zone. That's my type, and I will almost never break out of it. And you tend to find this this is all a very common case with players generally. You know, they like to play similar classes or similar roles in the group. It's right, oh, you know, you're always the jokey one, right? Or, you know, you're always kind of like the one who we know is going to turn evil and yada yada yada, or you're always the one with the damaged background and all of this kind of stuff. And sometimes you might not necessarily want that. Another thing that kind of follows or is a large part of that, so players always stick to their comfort zones, and very often players come to a game with their backstory all figured out. This is pretty bad. IMO. So I have nothing against coming to a game with a certain amount of backstory, and I'm massively guilty of this myself, because I'm a world builder. So when I come up with characters, I try and think of where have they come from and sort of what's their origin story, and they've always had like huge adventures beforehand because that's what I get distracted by. But generally, when players come to a game with their backstory already figured out, here's the sad truth. No one gives a shit about your character's backstory. You can write whatever you want. Pretty much no other player is going to read that, and sometimes the DM isn't even going to read that, right? Because it doesn't involve anyone else at the table. It doesn't involve anything else in the world. It's a trapping for your character and your character's growth throughout the game. And the more I play D&D, the sort of longer I play it, the more I start to rail against sort of players coming to games with elaborate backstories, or anything that's more than just like 3 lines. Guy with a novel for a backstory is usually going to say shit like, I'm a role player, but then expect everyone else at the table to bend over backwards to fix their character's fucked up mindset. Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Because once you give your character backstory, what you're basically doing is locking a character in your head instead of discovering what that character is with the rest of the people at the table, and involving those people in what your character is and will be, right? I'm not running a game or joining a game to fix your character. I'm joining a game to play Dungeons and Dragons and, you know, tell a story together. It's not my job to fix your sad, tragic backstory that you wrote on your own without any kind of involvement from the rest of us. So this is something that I see a lot with when you don't use random character generation. You know, players spend plenty of time at home on their own in secret building up a character that may have absolutely no relation to what you are planning to run, by the way. You know, they already have a cool concept in their mind, and now you're going to somehow have to hodgepodge that into the particular campaign that you want to tell. You know, I want to run a grim, dark game in Barovia, is it? What's the Castle of Strahd land? Barovia, isn't it? Grim, dark game in Barovia. Grim. The minute you say that to the party, I guarantee you at least 2 out of 5 will pull something like, cool, I am a turtle called Leonardo. Or no, it's going to be, Leon Daro or something, right? 2 of them will do that because they don't really care, or they're not thinking about the party and the story that is going to kind of grow out of this. They're thinking about a cool build that they want to play, which is fine, depending on the game. From Waterdeep, who is the son of King Elementster. Exactly, yeah. You can never just be a normal turtle. You have to be the turtle who was abandoned at birth and then, you know, fell into magic ooze and then was raised by a rat. So this is a very... What is it? It's one of the complexities about running a social game like D&D, right? You know, as the DM, you propose something, or sort of you have an idea that you're interested in. You put that forward, and then people buy in, and they say, "Oh, okay, cool, yeah, we'll play that, and that sounds good." And then the players will immediately forget everything that you've just said and look at their book and go, "That looks cool. I want to be that." And even if you say, well, no, that's not really campaign appropriate, they'll cling to it because that's what they want to be. So players always stick to comfort zones. Players who have the chance to sit and build stuff will also come up with a backstory to justify that. And also, players will optimize. And of course they'll optimize. That's what we do, right? You know, that's human nature. It's fine. It's also, this is fine. Also, kinda boring after the millionth Goliath barbarian. You know, like, it's been done, and I mean, that's it. Again, it's fine to a certain level of fine. I personally like to give my players a summary of the world and the campaign climate before I even accept to look at any character ideas. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's kind of, I think that's a large part of why it's so important to do a session 0, right? You know, you all have to have a little chat and figure out the kind of the medium ground, right? You know, like the DM isn't always going to get their perfect idea of like how their campaign wants to go anyway, you know, and that's totally right, because it shouldn't be about the DM's world, right? It really, we're looking for a shared space, right, where the DM is managing a lot of kind of different threads and stuff, but it's all about trying to get 6 people's vision, right, to somehow weave some compelling or at least consistent story out of that. You know, it doesn't have to be great, it doesn't have to be novel quality, but it just has to be fairly consistent. And a session 0 really kind of helps with that. Although I find you do still sometimes, you know, you do still run into the turtle problem out of that, and it's very difficult then to turn a player away from that. You know, if you say no to having a turtle, very often they'll expect you to give in somewhere else, right? You know, it's like, well, if you say no to this, you kind of have to say yes to this, because otherwise you're a DM who just keeps saying no, and the game says you shouldn't really be about that. You should be about supporting everyone's vision. So it becomes this weird kind of like negotiating strategy sometimes, depending on, you know, like the player's will. Bob's 5th Warlock is totally different because it's 2 levels Warlock. Oh god, yeah. Also, yeah, I mean, in fairness, that's kind of my... Oh god, I'm just going to put a note down here at the bottom. 5e Warlock should 100% have been an int class. If you think Warlock in 5th edition should have been Charisma, you are wrong. I'm not going to hold that against you, but you are unfortunately wrong, because if Warlock were int, that would support its lore better, that would support the game better, because you wouldn't have all of these bullshit sorcerer, paladin hybrids, or you wouldn't have so many of them, and it would give intelligence more of a reason to exist in the game. Thankfully, as the only one willing to DM, I can just say, this is the world, build something that fits in the world. That is a very good position to be in, yeah. It's one of the perks of being, you know, the forever DM, right? Eventually, they will learn. You'll each learn like what the other side can kind of get away with. So, why should you use random character generation? So players always stick to comfort zones. Players usually build something that they want to build, not necessarily what is appropriate for your game. And as they do that, they will come up with a backstory that almost always doesn't involve anyone else at the table. And then they may kind of like turn that or try and twist the game so that it revolves around their backstory. And players who have a lot of time to build a character will always 100% optimize it. Or the players who do optimize will kind of look down on the players who don't optimize. And that can be a very ugly dynamic that kind of appears. So you kind of, when you're DMing, you sometimes have to be alert of that and just kind of head things off at the pass. Why should you randomize character generation? To stop all of those 3 points. You will almost always be broken out of your comfort zone because you'll have a weird character combination that you were not expecting. Or you may even be forced to play as a race or class that you generally don't normally enjoy, right? Or that you have particular suspicions or sort of prejudices, I would say, against. That can break you out of your comfort zone, especially... we'll come on to that in a second. So this player's coming to a game with their backstory all figured out. So whenever I do random character generation, I like to do it with everyone as present at the table, or like as many people together at the same time, sort of rolling these characters together. And from those roles, everyone will sort of start building little character links together. I find normally out of that. I let players learn int mod with cantrips that use int as long as they can find someone to teach them. Oh, that's a cool idea. Linking it to another PC is great. Or like you can find it in like books or something, right? You know, like a little loot reward or something. No, that's cool. Anything that kind of links players more to NPCs and stuff in the world, I'm a huge fan of. See your point, but breaking out the comfort zone just for the sake of it seems wrong to me. Oh, yeah, no, I agree. Like, I wouldn't do this if it was just about, like, forcing players to kind of change how they would normally play. It's just a sort of pleasant side effect, right? Because really sort of, you know, it's about discovery and cooperation, I find. When you are randomly generating a character, it's almost like unwrapping a present, right? I don't know what's in the box. I don't know who I'm going to be yet. And with every kind of dice roll, you're unwrapping like a little bit. It's like, okay, cool, all right, I know I'm a tiefling. Okay, what am I now? Okay, I unwrap this bit. I'm a barbarian. Okay, cool. How did that happen? You know, what was I? Okay, I was a sage. Huh? And then as you kind of like, you're peeling back these layers, and with every sort of layer that you peel, there we go. You're instinctively just building a brand new connection or asking a question in your head that starts world building automatically, I find. So random character generation is great because it really helps to address these three things. But I find that the other thing that it really does is promote talk between players. I'll come on to that in a second. And it also gets you thinking about stuff you wouldn't normally think about. So when I was doing the hang on, sorry. I don't know if this is the right time to ask, but how do notches work with magical items? Good question. Okay, so let's just quickly swing to... so for those of you who don't know, notches are a system in Darker Dungeons that I was heavily influenced by James Young's 10-foot polemic document, which I definitely recommend, especially if you play... what is it called? Polemic. Lamentations of the Flame Princess, that's what it's called. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking out that document if you play that. It's got some great little house rules, some of which were a huge inspiration to me. So notches are a way of just kind of tracking weapon degradation over time, and I need to find the damn page for that. Or I close the window. Okay, cool. All right, so with notches. Notches and magic items, ultimately the answer boils down to you, or how you want to run your game. So I generally do, because otherwise the minute someone gets... what's the way to phrase it? It depends on how frequent magic items are in your campaign and how long you want players to be thinking about weapon degradation for. So, wear and tear, page 25. Okay, here we go. Part of the reason why I introduced the tempering system is almost to sort of rectify this. So, by default, yeah, a magic item can get a notch just as well as anything else. However, you could simply rule that anything that is magical automatically has like a pure temper to it, maybe. So although it still gains a notch, it gains less of a notch, right? So it increases the notch quantity of it, right? Maybe like a +3 sword has like an astral temper almost by design. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I'm afraid sort of the ultimately the answer kind of boils down to whatever works for your game. But the way I run it, magic items can have notches, but sometimes I will simply assign a tempering quality to an item if I think it at some point will have been tempered. So hopefully that answers your question, Champion. Okay, sorry, so where were we? We were talking about random generation. So the really exciting thing that I like is using random generation as a way of not just discovering the mechanical stuff about your character, you know, what your class is and what your stats are. It's about discovering who your character is. You know, like little weird things that you would never normally think about or choose to think about because you've got powers to think about, and powers are fun, right? But the reason I added these tables specifically to Darker Dungeons was to give players very quick hooks into building up a character that they may not necessarily normally choose to play. I almost exclusively before would play a young adult character because that's just the trap that I fall into. and it isn't until I started using these tables almost exclusively now whenever I build a character, that I would run into like running, okay, well now I'm an old fighter. That's cool, isn't it? I'm an old short fighter, like an old short human fighter who's like from a wealthy background, right? So I'm old, like why am I adventuring? And just like, and I would never normally do that, and it starts firing all these story hooks in my head immediately. The same with just like these little flavor things here, right? Having a scar or a tattoo or a piercing or a birthmark or an accent or whatever, you know. I don't go into any description on these because that's for you to figure out, right? That's your character to kind of work on. But just having like this one word thing to, okay, you do have a scar, you get to decide what that looks like. That leads to talk between players almost all the time, especially when you get accents, because players like to try accents and they will try it out on each other, and you will basically be laughing about your player's bad French accent for about the rest of the game. So that's really good. Like anything that gets players talking, I'm a huge fan of. And anything that gets you thinking more about your character as opposed to just combat, I absolutely love. And I find random character generation kind of does all of that stuff beautifully. The problem then always kind of becomes, and I think we're seeing this in chats, right? With roll stats. Yep. So the problem with a lot of all of this is, and this is always the question that kind of comes up, random stats though, and this point can be a big turn off for players, and that's fine. I can accept that. You know, maybe in your game you don't want a power disparity between, or such a, like an obvious power disparity between players starting off, and that's fine. You know, like not every game is kind of built for that, and not every player wants to start off feeling like clearly weaker than another player. So I think that is a legitimate concern. That doesn't mean there aren't ways to incorporate random rolls into coming up with stats. So that is part of the reason why I introduced these sort of dials into Darker Dungeons, specifically ways to randomize rolling abilities in a way that for a group might be more palatable, right? Specifically the shared party array. So instead of having every player roll their own array, you just keep going around the table. Every player rolls 3d6 or 4d6 depending on the power that you want for your game, and then that goes into a shared array, and until, like, once you've got 6 numbers, that's it. Every player now uses that array instead of the standard static array or their own kind of personalized arrays. They can choose, you know, depending on your game, either that is the array in order, but more commonly that's just like the starting pool. And I find that for me is a nice compromise between rolling everything and rolling nothing. You know, I would almost always prefer the party to use a randomly generated shared array than the static one, because again, I find that tends to lead to some interesting character builds that are not just cookie cutter ones found on the net or whatever. One of my current players started the campaign as an elf ranger and didn't enjoy it at all until some point I talked to him about a character switch. So while it might be cool, it also sadly often just leads to less enjoyment. And at the end of the day, D&D is played to enjoy. Oh, I definitely agree. You know, if at any point a player is clearly not having fun, as the DM, you kind of need to address that. You know, none of these should really be taken as absolutes. Even though obviously I am always 100% right 100% of the time. For clarity, I'm not. Just realised on the internet, sarcasm doesn't always carry. So I certainly recommend using random character generation as a starting point. As the game transpires, and in fairness, I find this a lot with players who have crafted their own character as well. You know, 3, 4, 5 sessions in, they realise the game isn't going to be about what they thought it was, or their character isn't meshing with the rest of the party in a way they thought it would. They decide that they want to play something else, and you know, that's fine. You know, we're all trying to get together and have fun and tell a story. So you kind of want the right tools to help you do that. I just think that random character generation has far more pros than it does cons. And the main con, really, this the sort of random stat aspect of it, can be very easily sort of overcome or sort of brushed aside even. So yeah, if you randomly generate your characters, you are cool in my books, and if you don't, you are also cool, because I don't always randomly character generate myself. It's sort of, you know, again, you know, you have to kind of agree with the party and get more yays than nays. So do a shared array, then everyone wins or loses, depending on the roles. I tend to find I am aware, certainly, of my bias when it comes to things like randomly character generating, because as a DM, I am very much into. I'm a DM, and I love being a DM because I like to world build. Right, I like to create little stories from things and little connections and kind of follow plot threads and see, oh, well, hang on, this kind of leads to that and all that stuff. So I like being the DM because that gives me a bigger net to kind of build worlds from. And randomly, starting off with randomly generating a character, for me, helps me pushes me in directions my brain of its own accord wouldn't normally go into. So it's a fantastic world building tool. And just as I like to promote conversation between players, I will push anything that gets people thinking about worlds, because that's what I love. Any other thoughts or comments on random character generation before we press on, I think? I read this the other day for something I'm working on. Particularly fail on either fence. Oh, I see. That's yeah, that's interesting. Pino. Yeah, that might help as well. Cool. Oh, geez, 10-10. And I've only done 3. I have I've ranted quite a lot about very few topics today. Let's do one more. while I'm here, let's just see what this one is. Question 4. Can we adapt Fate Core narrative first mechanics into D&D 5th edition? I think that one comes to us actually from Floof, I believe was the asker's name. One of my kind patrons even. Thank you for the question, Floof. I forgot to add it to the question there. Sorry. So, for those of you who haven't played Fate Core, Fate Core is a really, really nice little narrative-focused RPG system. I ran a campaign myself in it a few years back and had a lot of fun with it. Let's get up a character sheet. Fate Core. Here we go. Here you go. So, your character, rather than like picking from prescribed sort of classes and races and whatever, you describe your character basically in terms of what are called aspects. These just sentences basically, or sort of like 3-word descriptions that sum up an interesting or particularly notable thing about your character, right? You know, if we were doing if we were running like a 5th edition game and I wanted to be I wanted to be a character, you know, what's the high concept of my character? I could just say, oh, I'm an Eladrin sage fighter. And that's it. That is my character essentially defined, right? I am an Eladrin, so everyone at the table knows that my character can do anything that an Eladrin can do. I'm a sage. Well, I can do anything that a sage can do. I'm a fighter. I can do anything that a fighter can do. And the game is basically built around sort of in conjunction with these sort of aspects. You have your skills that determine how good you are in certain things. And the game is basically built on combining those things and exploring what these aspects mean about your character and about the world, right? So it's a lot more narrative and rules light, I would say, than Dungeons and Dragons, certainly. And it's more about story scenes than specifically combat scenes. Fake Fractal, the room is on fire. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Fake Fractal, like it's a very elegant way to build a game, and I was very into Fate for a while. Has its problems, especially for long-running campaigns, I found. But if you haven't played anything in the Fate Core engine, you should 100% give it a try at some point. It also has a lighter variant, I believe, called the Fate Accelerated, I believe. Yeah, there's a sort of slimline version, even of Fate, called Fate Accelerated. That is also fun in its kind of own sort of flavour. And you should definitely try that out as well. So 5e is complicated. It's trying to straddle narrative and simulation. So 5e is certainly one of the I would say almost one of the rules lightest versions of D&D. And with systems like inspiration and the flaws and bonds and traits, things that are almost like lifted directly from Fate Core. it's trying to incorporate some of this kind of narrative flavor and gameplay into a historically simulation-based engine. Everything is measured in distances, specific distances with specific weights, and you have a lot of rules telling you. Well, you have like hundreds of pages of rules just telling you how spells work, and it's very sort of prescriptive and simulation-y. But there are ways to try and get some of that narrative flavor, really, into our 5e sessions. So 5e has one of these sort of systems by default, or sort of not by default, as one of the kind of optional rules in the DM handbook. But it's one that I expanded on in Darker Dungeons because I was a big fan of it in Fate, which is Degrees of Success, 42. So one of the great things that Fate had, or sort of, and a lot of narrative games have, is even if you fail something or you succeed at something, the margin of your failure or success sort of tends to different story beats, right? You might fail a little bit, you might fail a lot. You might succeed a little bit, you might succeed really well. And then, you'll either kind of get a perk or a sort of punishment, depending on how well you succeed. So this kind of narrative moment, right? It's almost like a narrative gap. Is that what I say? Opportunity, I think. And really, that's kind of what we're looking for here. We're looking for like narrative opportunities, like it's like a time where player and DM can talk, negotiate about where the story is going. So that's almost kind of what we're looking for in these moments, right? We're looking for a way to kind of inject a time where I, as the DM, can have a little conversation with the player about what they might want to happen right now, or what they think is fun to happen, and between the two of us, or between everyone else at the table, we'll kind of agree on what is going to happen, or what is most appropriate for the story. And we're looking for any of these kind of opportunities. So Degrees of Success is definitely one. Anytime you really fail or succeed really well, that's a moment, or you want to succeed, right? This is the core one, and the one I do a lot in my games especially, is succeeding at a cost. You could fail, but maybe you want to sacrifice something, or something bad also happens to get your success. So that is a narrative opportunity, because that is a time for me to have a chat with the player about, like, how important is this to them? What are they willing to give up to make this thing happen? And degrees of success are great for that. Another little thing is, how did you kill it? Like, just asking players little questions, right? As the game sort of progresses, just in the natural flow of it. That is a narrative opportunity for them. That's a time for them to describe or add a little bit of flair into the world. And that gives them a chance to kind of describe how they think their character should be cool, right? Does the fighter with the great sword like leap forward and sort of slash it into That's probably what I would say. But what does that player think his character would do? You know, that's his narrative opportunity, and you know, it's a great time for that player to kind of explore that or sort of lay it out in front of the table. Now, other questions, and these are questions about the world. So, before I played Fate, I was very much a DM who would build the world, build all of the NPCs, or sort of build the ones that I need or I know I'm going to need for that session. And that would be them, and they'd have their own little backstory, and that the players could kind of figure out a little bit as you know as the game progresses, and that was fun for me because again, you know, world builder is the stuff that I like. What Fate taught me is that I don't have to do that. Players can shoulder a huge amount of that, and in fact, the more of that the players get involved with, the more involved in the world they become, or the more invested, right? So very often what I do now is if an NPC comes up like randomly during the game, sometimes even if it's a major one, I don't even bother to name them. I will pick someone at the table to name that character. What's the name of this NPC? Where is this NPC from? What race is this NPC? That was very loud. This has been really good for me. And I want to say it's also been really good for my game. Because now that NPC isn't mine, it is the NPC of the player who crafted it or named it. So they have an implicit sense of ownership of that NPC, which is great because now that they've got more of a hook into the sort of world. And it also forces me, not necessarily forces me, but it can lead again to more sort of story beats or plot threads for the future that I will never have considered, right? You know, where is this NPC from? And the player who doesn't know the world, right, they'll just come up with something just off the top of the head. Oh, where is this NPC from? Drakis. I don't know what that is. The player doesn't know what that is. We're going to have to figure out what that is together at some point, and that's a really interesting. Like I said, again, it's a narrative opportunity for them to explore a bit more of the world, or sort of get more of an anchor into the setting. Which again can be great fun. And in fact, one of my favourite ones is what accent does this NPC have? That can be tremendous fun, depending on your group and you know how comfortable players can be sort of doing accents and stuff. But that is a lot of fun sometimes if you have the right group. Not least because it ends up again sort of just coming up with these implicit connections of like, oh well, if this NPC has this accent, where are they from? And does that place also have this accent? And you know, why do they have this accent? And all of this, you know, there's like so many nice little hooks and expansions from that. GFRPG City Creation chapter does a great job of giving some guide rails to follow that fits D&D semi-well. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm interested in sort of anything that kind of naturally or you know helps to build cities and sort of worlds. There was a huge kind of random table generator that I used to use a while ago. I can't remember the name of it now, but was great for that kind of stuff. And in fact, something I really want to start doing very soon is using the... in fact, I might do this when I expand Frostfall at some point. In fact, maybe that will probably be a perfect opportunity for that, is to use the random adventure generators in the 5e Dungeon Masters book. Because that could be very fun to come up with some outcomes of. Fate Accelerated is paradoxically harder to grasp than Core 2 stripped down. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like the whole aspect system of it was very strange for me to get my head around at first. The only way I could kind of get on board with it was Fate. Someone did a really cool. Yeah, here we go. Took Fate and applied it to Pathfinder. I'm not going to go into it now because it's there's obviously a lot here to read. But if you are at all interested in trying out Fate, and you like Pathfinder, or you want to run Fate in a sort of dungeon D&D kind of way, this is a great resource to kind of see how the two link together. Yeah, so this is Pathfinder Fate Accelerated, and you'll find this on killerstrike.com. Don't show Frostfall. One of my players is watching and I want to surprise them. Oh, okay, cool. Excellent. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, it might go in a slightly different direction at some point. But it is definitely a thing I'm kind of I've been thinking about a lot the last week. Yeah, I might do a few sort of like random encounters over like the next sort of month maybe, while I kind of tinker with that in the background. Maybe it can be like a kind of open setting or something. Might be a really good one actually too. I've been meaning to kind of do a setting for Darker Dungeons to kind of get involved with, and that could be an interesting experiment for that, like an open kind of setting to play with this in. But I'll have a think and see what that is. What is Frostfall? Frostfall is just the like a random setting idea that we sort of came up with a few streams ago. That came out of a question about sort of snow and crystals and stuff. And I just got distracted and started going down the rabbit hole and crafting a brand new system with crystals and etc. Good. Yeah, Strider, if you do end up running something very much like that, I'd be cool to hear how that goes at some point, or sort of what you bring to that, and then I can steal it and be totally inspired by it. I mean, be inspired by it and then totally steal it. Cool. So sorry, where were we? So yeah, narrative opportunities. So this has been the main learning point that I kind of took from Fate, is giving players a bit more control over the story of where stuff is going, and it's helped me take more of a backseat and be a bit more relaxed about the story of or the overarching story in a lot of ways, mostly because players. Here's the sad fact. Players generally don't remember anything beyond the last session, if that. So I would historically come up with, I like big stories and involved shenanigans and NPCs that kind of have depth and connections to lots of stuff kind of going on. And unless you're doing like a big log at the end of every session, and I'm not doing that because I'm not going to run the world and be the archivist at the same time. I've got stuff to do. Players don't remember anything beyond the last session if they remember that last session. Sometimes you'll get a player who takes more notes than the other ones, but really, like, no one remembers stuff, which means your story doesn't have to be perfect in any way, shape, or form. So, because no one remembers stuff, your story doesn't have to be, Shakespeare. It doesn't have to be elaborate or unique or special, right? It just has to be entertaining, really, or entertaining enough for 4 to 5 people, or maybe more, to turn up to your table for a few hours a week and kind of keep stuff going. So because your story doesn't have to be perfect, you can be a lot more comfortable about drafting players in to parts of that, right? Or sort of giving them a bit more influence and control, a few more sort of narrative opportunities to do stuff or control stuff in that world, especially if you're doing a homebrew world, right? That my current campaign is taking place in a world that we all sort of built together called Solitaire. We did a microscope for it. Actually, let me see if I can find it. Oh, hang on, accept microscope. Oh, I don't think I'm going to be able to find this. I am awful at archiving stuff. Microscope. Okay, here we go. Cool. So we did a microscope for a sort of brand new world about sort of, it's probably about a year ago now, actually. And if you, again, if you aren't aware of this, microscope RPG. If you are a DM and you like to build worlds and you like to run Dungeons and Dragons, get microscope almost immediately, because it's a brilliant way to build some collaborative stuff with your players. I have huge fun with this, and I recommend it to everyone all the time. So we, because I'm a lot more comfortable now, not being the sole architect of the world and its stories, I was a lot more comfortable letting players add stuff into this world and continue to do so, and that's now pushed it in ways that I would never have dreamed of. It's introduced threads that I would never have considered. I've got some of my favorite villains and NPCs in this setting that have come out of threads that players introduced. Stuff like the God Machine War and sort of like the Elswood and the Scarlet Truth, and sort of like these layers of history that we built in an evening. And this will probably be my world that I run games in, maybe forever, because it's so much fun. But thanks to this, like I say, I'm now a lot more confident in letting players own even larger bits of the world, right? I never really thought about how wood elves, for instance, behave in this world. and I didn't really have to because a player chose to be a wood elf, and now I can let them decide or sort of have a huge say in what wood elf culture is and how it relates to stuff that is in the world that we all built together. You know, like how do wood elves belong in the Elsewood, and what do they do, and you know, has this aberrant forest made them a much more kind of militant and aggressive kind of race? And spoiler, it has. So big side tangent there, big promo for Microscope. Get it? So what can we kind of learn from Fate? Let your players do stuff in your world. Really is kind of, I guess, the point that I'm kind of getting at. Narrative opportunities. This is what you want to be really kind of working towards. And in fairness, it depends very much on your particular group and your players, and not every player is going to enjoy this, and that's fine. You know, you kind of have to get a feel for your own group and way of playing. But this has been tremendous fun for me, and it's also like, I mean, it's been a great improv tool as well. I barely prep anything for my game now beyond a few scant notes about NPCs and combat encounters, which I love, because now I don't have to think about everything, because I can just put some of that pressure on players to come up with stuff, and that can be very rewarding. I would recommend you do as much of this in your game as possible. I'm going to butcher that. Bibi Walole. Yeah, there we go. One of my players showed me your work. Been using Monster Maker and the Roll20 sheet since. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying it. The Roll20 sheet, especially. Like, I know I think there are a few issues with that at the moment. I'm aware that there are probably a couple of bugs that need to be fixed with that. The problem with the Roll20 sheet is, to do work on that, I have to have hang on, where is it? Roll20. In order to, why don't you just tell me what subscriptions are? Yeah, here we go. In order to push changes to the Roll20 character sheet, I have to be a pro member in order to do that, and in order to be a pro member, I have to pay money for that. And I don't play Roll20 at all. Or sorry, I don't play using Roll20 at all. So it tends to take a bit of a backseat to everything. Like, I think it's in a pretty good shape for most of it, but it, like, unless other people start doing fixes for it, because it is open source. Yeah, that might have to be a bit of a slow burner. Though I'm also testing Foundry. Oh, interesting. What's Foundry? I think someone else mentioned that. How does it compare to Roll20? I do like it when they do the demos with all these sort of like nice maps and stuff. Like, you can make any system look good with this, to be fair. Oh, look at that automated light stuff. That would be great if you could do that on a like live desktop, wouldn't it? Yeah, virtual tabletops. Oh, okay. They've added more, have they? Yeah, I don't really I don't use virtual tabletops myself, unfortunately. Like I say, I'm very lucky to have players around me that I can just kind of dip in with. using the aspects fractal to help guide. Let you put a line fuck. That looks like you set up a huge plot point 6 months ago. Yeah, no. I definitely agree. So that has also kind of been something that I've tried to do less of, or really like my focus in my current campaign has been to not plan, not do a big plot, and almost find the story. It's almost like I'm running a J.J. Abrams kind of game, right? I have no idea where it's going. I'm just going to kind of bullshit a story as it goes and figure stuff out. I'm going to leave a lot of plot threads, and somehow we're going to kind of find out what the interesting ones are, and I'll weave in the rest in some genius capacity later on. And that's been unusual, exciting in its own way, and also terrifying because I'm like, I don't necessarily have a game plan for this, and we're all gonna figure it out together. But like I say, I've got some of my favorite villains out of this, and it's now got a very strong character-centered plot line, as opposed to what it might normally have been, which is like, oh, we've got a big bad, we have to go and kill the big bad. Now there's like an elder god gestating in one of the player characters because they read a book at like level 2, and now they're coming up to like level 8, level 9. It's becoming a real gross problem for them, and they've now had to do a big quest line to find some special crystal to maybe cure her soul and sort of pull this parasite out. And that's let me weave in characters from like ages and months ago, and kind of build story material together, which is just so satisfying when that works. When it doesn't work, again, you don't really have to worry, because players, again, they're not going to remember. They won't remember your failures. They'll only remember the stuff you get right. And also, actually, having said that, the best part is why you don't need to have a big plot up front. And the answer to this is pretty simple. Why you don't need to have one? Because the players will talk and tell you the story themselves. This here really is why you don't need to plot stuff very often, or you can be as bare bones as you want, because again, this kind of feeds back into narrative opportunities. You need to give the players enough to spark conversation and spark plot hooks and plot threads, but you don't have to have the whole thing sealed up yet. And that's great, because 9 times out of 10, once the players have that information and that sort of those few hooks, they're going to start talking at the table about things that they think it might be, or things that they hope it isn't going to be. And you can just steal all of that 100%. Or you can steal the one that they are reacting the most to. If they're like, oh God, I hope it is an omen, right? Well, now you know who it kind of has to be, because they really don't want to face that guy. Just let players talk amongst themselves long enough, and you will have all the story material you will ever need. That is why I am the laziest DM in the world. I spend all my time writing 5e supplements, because I have all this free time, because I don't need to do any prep for my games. That's basically it. Do something similar. They only do the start and the end, letting my players defeat other big bads they've created for themselves to find a solution for the actual end. Yeah, that's definitely a good way to do it as well. So I always like to, whatever happens, I always like to have a strong finish, right? You know, you want that final fight to be big and climactic and sort of as epic as you possibly can for like that level and scene, right? So sometimes, yeah, it can help to have the start of it and the rough shape of the end of it, and then all these kind of plot threads spilling out in like nesting out from, rooting out, whatever. And then you kind of know how to, or you have the space to kind of weave those together to finish the damn thing. And that's good, yeah. Railroad stories often require an NPC that guides them around, so the DM itself is like forcing the players to stay on course. Yeah, it's railroad ones are awkward. I don't have anything necessarily. Like railroad gets, I think, a very bad rap because I mean, like I do railroad in a particular shape, right? So this could be a huge talk on its own. All right, I know it's coming up to 11. But this is kind of an interesting thread. So railroading, kind of whoops, kind of not. So there are two different types of railroading, right? So one is this thing will always happen, whatever you do. And the other is this thing will happen, or will happen because I don't have time to prep something else. Or because this is what you said the party was going to do. So some people assume that if you do any kind of prep at all, or you build anything at all, that's a kind of railroad. And I disagree very strongly with that. You know, a railroad, in my definition, is the players are sort of locked into a roller coaster, right? And you are the DM. You are laying the tracks. It doesn't really matter which direction the players are going to lean in, because they are going to follow that one track and hit all of the bumps and all of the scares that you have built beforehand, right? That's not necessarily bad, because sometimes, how to put it? Yeah, railroading's a really difficult one, especially to talk about just off the cuff. Let me have a think. I don't usually plan an end or even decide that X. Players got really into stomping the car and turned into to do something else. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I'm really enjoying running a game that way at the moment, because it's almost like it's a discovery for me as the DM, right? I'm not bored running the game because I don't know what's going to happen next. I'm finding it out as the players are. It's not just me waiting for them to hit story beats. It's the 5 or 6 of us together discovering this world and this story. And I've got like a little bit of foresight. You know, my fog of war is more receded, right? You know, I can see a bit further. I've got dark vision, they've got low light vision, whatever. But I'm still kind of restricted, and that's really good for keeping me excited and involved in the game. Stuff about the parties and hosts home, because they do have an objective there, but they also do a lot of forests. Quiet. Railroading is okay when you're newer. I just call 5 to... Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, this is something that a lot of people kind of forget, is that everyone started D&D not knowing what the fuck they're doing, right? And before you can improv, right, or know how to make shit up, you first need to have a rough idea of what the components even just look like, right? You know, what is the rough structure of an adventure? How far should I be expected to push players? How does a combat come together? So definitely, especially when you're just starting out, you know, there's absolutely no shame in just doing a railroad, because you're learning it, you're figuring this out, and you're building up this experience. You know, you can't just be expected to go in and make shit up off the cuff, unless you've got like prior experience in something else that kind of feeds into it. So yeah, people like to just sort of knee-jerk railroading bad. It's not. It's always situational. And it's very dependent on the group and the particular adventure. You need a certain level of, I would say, experience and a certain level of confidence to be able to just assemble a game off the hoof, right? And that only comes with this sort of time and, gameplay. Probably have hundreds of loose plot threads that were never looked into, that will either go away or evolve on their own into something else, if they ever become something. Yeah, exactly. Like that for me is almost like I'm just going to gush about our current campaign role, because I'm so excited by it, because we have plot threads that I know are never going to be resolved in this campaign, and what we've agreed is, once this campaign is resolved, we're going to start playing almost like shorter games, like 10-session campaigns, possibly with different rule sets. You know, like Dungeon World, we'll give that a try. Maybe even Pathfinder, right? Just give that a sort of sample, just kind of like try different systems. But we'll set each one in a different part of the world and kind of flesh out little bits there, and maybe some of them will pick up some of the plot hooks from this campaign. And it's very inspiring to kind of just sit there and think about all these plot threads going off, and just the potential of them. I've never really had that in a game before. It's kind of just, okay, we've ended it, and we know what the story ended as. I haven't had so many kind of loose threads spilling out. So railroading. So a lot of people say. So I was having a discussion with someone the other week, actually. It was like, any kind of prep you do is a railroad, and I very much disagree with this, especially the kind of DM I am, because my normal sort of workflow is players will either tell me where they're going, or I'll have a vague idea where to sort of push things. And then sort of based on that, I will build an adventure zone. So because I run things on my games always run on like week-long rests. I tend to I sort of break. It's helped me run my game less in terms of simulation and it more as a sort of, it's almost like an episodic kind of TV series, right? So whenever I know that the players are going to go out on an adventure, I need that particular zone to have a set number of encounters and have like a decent start, middle, and end. So I will build that kind of zone, right? Let's say I know that they are going to do a heist, do a heist of the hang on, one infiltrate. There we go. That's the word. Infiltrate the Tomb of Hope. What is it? Reliquary of Warforged cult thing. So the players will give me an idea or an inclination of kind of where they're going, and I will build sort of around 3 sessions worth of content sometimes around that, or what I call an adventure zone. And this will have plot beats and encounters. It's sort of pre-generated a lot of the time. And I'm kind of building that roller coaster, anticipating roughly where the players might go. I'm putting in little choices that I think they're going to take, and they might not. And a lot of people may construe this as railroading, right? And it's not. What you're doing is you're building content for your players to experience and like have fun with, right? And you have to do that. You can't build the entire game just off the hoof. The trick is to build these sort of little adventures or these little zones, and again, harkening back here, you still want to give your players space to have a narrative choice or opportunity within this structure that you've kind of pre-built, right? So a lot of times, let's say, so for the adventure zone, let's say for the Tomb of Hope, I know that, or I've pre-built sort of 3 encounters. 1 versus Modrons, 2 versus Modrons chasing players, 3 versus Warforged Titan. So I pre-build a lot of these encounters, especially, I've got like tile maps and miniatures, so I know I need to kind of get all that stuff prepared anyway before the game. So I'll build these spaces, but change them depending on what players do during that scenario, right? So for instance, I was expecting players to kind of fight the Modrons in the first kind of in the entrance hallway, run away, the Modrons would reactivate and then sort of chase the players into the next space, and they would have a sort of fight in the reliquary. But what the players did, the players managed to use a wall of stone scroll to sort of block up the doorway, which meant that I didn't have that encounter was overcome, and I was able to instead feed that into the narrative kind of for the final boss fight for the Warforged Titan. That now then became a ticking clock. So So it's not railroading to pre-build content. You just have to be mindful to react or sort of give yourself room to maneuver when players don't do what you're anticipating them to do. And if they do something that is really clever, even if it is super annoying, you want to reward them for that. And that means being able to change your story to accommodate their sort of experiences and their choices. The unfortunate thing is just that this only really comes with time and experience. You need a history of adventure building and sort of, it's almost like stored encounters in your head that you can just kind of pull out at random and go, okay, well, I know I ran this in the past and it was kind of like this, and it's the perfect shape for this thing that they've done that really annoyed me, but I have to kind of go along with now. And it takes time to kind of build up that sort of mental library, but it's very rewarding when you finally get there. So if you're railroading now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Don't feel bad for it. If your players are having fun, that's kind of the important thing, really. Just try and open yourself up to more narrative opportunities. God, this sounds so wanky. But sort of the more you sort of lean into this stuff, in my experience, and obviously I don't play with like all the players in the world. The more you lean into sort of narrative opportunities, the easier I think you will find running a game over time. Okay, all right, 11 o'clock. Actually, I should probably call it there for the night. Sorry, 3 hours. I let time get away from me. But I do like talking about this stuff, so yay. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Unless there is any sort of questions that anyone would like to drop now, before I start to wind things down. Okay, cool. In which case, I'm going to call it there, I think, for the evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. This has been Social Encounter, and I've been Giffyglyph. Special thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Your support really does mean a lot. It is, like I say, very rewarding to. Also, it's very encouraging to know that people like your work. Certainly like it enough to pay money for it. So yes, thank you to all of my Patreon supporters, especially like Adi Weistragia, Anthony Kapler, Brady, Douglas, James Sundon, and Seth Cooper. Your contributions hugely appreciated, and they will continue to fund the future of my supplements. I think coming up, I have the chapter on Light and Shadow still to sort of release, still to finish up. So I'm hoping to get that finished up either tomorrow or sort of during the week. And then I will be able to make a press on with some of the other sort of the version 2.2 changes for Darker Dungeons, some of which I need to still have a bit of a think about, but that's the next sort of major project in the pipeline. There is also I think recent, where was it? Yeah, so currently working on the changes for light and shadow. Hopefully that's going to come out very soon. I have a few changes in mind for the web app, but that may need to be put on hold for the moment. But can you actually take my name and put Strider in there instead? Oh, yep, of course. Yeah, not a problem. I can do that. I'll do that very shortly. Oh, in fact, actually, because I will forget if I don't do it now. Just Strider, yeah? There we go. Well done, OBS. Brilliant bit of software. Sorry, besides the light changes, are you adding anything else or just changing it? So there are a few variants for, I want to add in a few variants for magical burnout. For stress, I think may need some revisions. There's a few notes on journeys that I need to consider adding. I was hoping to be able to add in a chapter on what do you call them? Sort of mercenaries and helpers and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not quite sure whether that's going to make 2.2. It kind of depends on how much time I have free in the next couple of weeks and how much momentum I get with this. I am aware that I'm spreading myself quite thin at the moment. So I did have stuff that I wanted to write on on sort of an economy, but that's probably going to get pushed to a separate book, I think. Yeah. So I think, yeah, it's probably going to be light and shadow, possibly something on mercenaries, and variants for those 3 sections that are going to be the major changes. I don't think anything else requires attention at the moment. What can you say about the burnout variants? Okay, they're nothing too major. I think they're just, some of them are to support class variant burnouts. So different classes can use different burnout dices. So like if you're a warlock and a wizard and a sorcerer, maybe you start off with like a different number and you kind of roll it at different times, just for a little bit of flavor. And the other one is to support not rolling the burnout on cantrips, because I know that can put a lot of players off using the burnout variant. So it's just to add in a variant to officially kind of support that and help players be more comfortable with that rule set. Also put me under sigils. Oh, sorry, I missed that? Okay, all right. I may have to do that next time, unfortunately, Strider, because if I do, you are going to get hidden under here. You are going to get hidden because of my giant head. So I'll get that fixed up for you next time, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. So that's all the stuff I've kind of got coming up at the moment. I think I have I've added a new Patreon tier just under for $400, just to kind of, if we hit that, then I'll start thinking about adding in sort of database support for the Monster Maker app so that people can save their characters without having to like save it to a file and stuff, and hopefully be able to share them more visibly. I need to have a think about how I'm going to do that, and that's kind of why I've set it at the tier, because once it hits that point, I'll be forced to. So I'll worry about it then. And yeah, so yeah, hopefully that's kind of everything I've got coming up at the moment. Like I say, I'll probably do a few more random encounters as the week goes on. But yes, unless there is anything else anyone wants to jump in chat, I will make my final goodbyes. Oh, thank you, Arkenforge. Arkenforge. Yeah, there you go. There's your name now. Thank you, Arkenforge, folks. The secret really is just to keep rambling, and eventually something half nonsensical falls out. That tends to be my approach in DMing. Good stream. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Cool. Yes, hopefully you enjoyed the stream, and like I say, there will be another one, the regular time, I think, next week of Sunday around 8 p.m. British time. So thank you very much. You can obviously find me on Patreon, on Reddit, on Twitter, also my website, giveyourglyph.com. And on Twitch, like, subscribe, do all the normal stuff that people say at the end of these things. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next week. Thanks very much, everyone. Good night.